In this video, we'll look at how user management works in OpenGround Cloud. We'll look at a number of topics related to user management, starting with how to add new users in OpenGround Cloud Professional. So to do that, we'll open up OpenGround Cloud Professional, and in the System ribbon, go to Create User. So we'll enter in the details here. The username can be whatever you'd like it to be. I've just happened to use the email address here. And then we'll enter in the first name, last name, the email. So the email is important that the email address you use matches the email the user uses to log in to their Bentley profile. The default security group, we will come back to that later. We can enter the user's phone numbers. We can set if the user is active or not. If you set no, the user will not have access to your system. You might want to track if the user is external or not. I'll say no here. And you can enter in an expiration date. So if you want the user's access to expire at a certain point in time, you can enter that date here. And I'll just say that this user is from the Seattle office. And then I'll click Save. You'll have the option to send a welcome email to the newly created user. So that welcome email will notify the user that they have access to this cloud. It will also send them a link to download the installer for the OpenGround Cloud launcher. I'll just click no here. And the next thing we'll want to be aware of is the Manage Users grid. So here we can see all the users in our system. We can select a user and we can edit that user's detail. So as I mentioned before, if we wanted to no longer give a user access, we can come in here and change them to be inactive and have set this to no, and that will take away their access to your cloud. We can also resend welcome emails if the user's lost track of theirs or needs an updated one. We can also delete the user. And this grid is like any other grid in OpenGround Cloud, so you can sort the grid. You can also use these filters and basically set this up to review the information in whatever way you need to. All right, the next topic we'll look at is how to add system administrators. So we'll go back to our users grid here, and we'll click on Manage Admins. So you can see up in the top here is our available users who are not system administrators at this time. So if we want to make one an admin, we can select it or select multiple and then do add selected, and that would make them a system administrator. So best practice would be to not make everyone in your organization a system administrator. You'd really only want your true power users that are familiar with the system and really understand the consequences of the changes they might make. So your other users that aren't system administrators, you should make sure to give them a level of access that's appropriate for what they need to do, and that might include which projects they're given access to, as well as what areas of the program they can access and what changes they can make, and what settings and configurations they can control. So that level of access that a user has is controlled by groups, and that's what we'll look at next. All right, so first we'll look at how groups can be used to give users different levels of access. So I'll close my users grid here, and go back to the project level in that Systems tab, and I'll click on the Groups button there. So groups are basically just different profiles saying what level of access a user will have. So OpenGround comes with a number of default groups, so we can see them here. And each group has roles assigned to it. So I'll open up the view group and go to assign roles. You can see for the view group, it only has a limited number of allocated roles. If I open up the project manager and go to the roles for that one, it has basically all the roles assigned to it, letting the user have access to all these different areas of the program. So we can edit those roles for each group, again, just by allocating them or deallocating them as appropriate. And then we can also create new groups with the create button here. All right, so there are two different types of groups, the project level groups and the system level groups, and we'll look at the difference between the two here. So those groups we just looked at, such as the view group and the project manager group, those are project level groups. They let users change things at the project level only. So for example, in our project manager group, they have the ability to manage pick lists. That would only let them change pick lists within specific projects they have access to. They can't change things at the system level. So in other words, that means they can't modify the pick lists within in the config pack, which would affect every project within that configuration pack. They're only able to modify things at the project level. The other type of group is the system level group. You can see that noted here. So as we said before, you don't want to make everyone a system admin that has full access to everything. But you may want to let certain users have some level of system access. So for example, we have the project creator group here. Oops, sorry, I clicked the wrong one there. The project creator group. And this lets this user create projects. Doesn't necessarily give them any other system level access, but it does let them create those projects. So when we create a new group, we can specify if it's yes, it is system level, or no, which would indicate that it is just a project level group. Once you do create a group, you can't change if it's system level or project, so you do have to make sure you get that right when you set it up. All right, so now that we're familiar with the two different types of groups, how do we actually use them? So first we'll look at how to use those system level groups. So to use these, we will have to come back here to System and Manage Users, and then System Access. This brings up an interface listing all the users in our system that are not system administrators. Again, those system admins have access to everything, so there's no need to assign them to a system level group. But for each user, we can come in here and assign the levels of system access we want to give them. So for example, the example user that we just created, we can add them to the project creator group, and then they'll have access to create projects. Next, we'll look at how to use the project level groups. So there's various ways these project level groups can be used and applied. So the first workflow is that we could take one user and assign them to groups for various projects. So I'll come down here and find our example user. There he is. And I will go into this user access interface. And how this works is that I can pick a project, pick the project level security group I want them to have, and then add selected. And that will give that user access to that project with that security group. I could also select different groups, select different projects and add those, or I could even do add all to give the user access to all the projects in the database. Likewise, I can do the opposite and come down here and remove access to certain projects in a similar manner. I can also do the reverse process and basically take various users and give them access to an individual project. So I'll exit out of this users grid and I'll come back in here to our system level and into, let's see, I'll select a project. We'll do test new project. And you'll want to select project access. You might need to click on that projects tab to make sure that you get this ribbon here, but that's where you'll find project access. You can also access this by opening up the project, and then you'll within that project you'll see that same project access button. So here you can see that we have some users that have already been assigned to this project with the view group. I could also come here and select the users I want to add. Again, select the level of access I want them to have and add them to this project. And once again, you can also do the opposite and remove the users from this project from down here. And the third way you can assign a project level group is by assigning a default group for each user. So this will be done from manage users. I'll open up our example user again and go to edit user. And we can select a default security group. So I'll give a view group as a default and save. And now when a new project is created, this user is automatically going to get assigned to this group for that project. Even with a default security group assigned, you can still come into either user access or the project access and modify what level access that user has. But the default when a new project is created is to give that user access at their default level. And if you don't have a default security group assigned and a new project is created, that user will have no access at all to that new project, and you'll have to manually grant them access. All right, now we'll just look at a few other features to be aware of for user management. So one thing is this options button here. So under here, you can set a default group for project creators. So for example, if someone has system level access to create projects, and then they do create a project, this will make them a project manager for that project. So they'll have access with the project manager group. So even if they have a view access as their default security group for other projects, if they created that project, this will override it and give them project manager access. The other thing to be aware of is setup. So here you can add different properties. Sorry, I think I clicked the wrong button there. Here we go. So here you can add different properties that can be stored for each user. So let's see an example of how that can work well. I'm just going to select a different project up here, and I'm going to go into project access. Again, I have to click that projects tab in order to see it, and then project access. So let's say I have a really long list of users. I only want to give the users from the Seattle office access. I can do a little filter to only have those Seattle workers selected, and then I can add those all into this project. And that makes things a little more efficient if you have a lot of users. You can create some sort of category to group them together and then use that to filter and assign to projects as necessary. The last topic we'll look at is how user management affects other OpenGround Cloud apps, such as Template Studio. So a user will need to be a system admin to save anything to a config pack in one of the other apps, such as Template Studio. So if a user is not an admin, they'll be able to save locally. They can also create a new template and save it to a project, or they can load a template and save it to a project. But in order to save to that config pack, you would need to be a system admin. And this lets your system admins really control what changes get made to your standard templates instead of kind of having it a free-for-all where any user can make those changes.